Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli has said that he will go ahead with the controversial multi-billion-dollar hydropower project financed by China days after returning to power. Oli, who had harbored public rancor over India's alleged role in ousting him from power in 2016, also said that he would review the convention of Nepalese soldiers being recruited in the Indian armed forces. The Chinese role in Nepal's economy has been growing in recent years. As part of its One Belt, One Road initiative, China is funneling as much as $8 billion into the infrastructure and other key sectors in the landlocked country. The relative significance of Chinese money is evident from the fact that Nepal's gross domestic product was just above $21 billion in 2016 as per the World Bank. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze Nepal's tilt towards China. Joining me on the program today are Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor, Chinese Studies, JNU, Professor S.D. Muni, Foreign Affairs Expert, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General Research and Information System for Developing Countries, and Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, former Ambassador. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Professor Muni, I'd like to begin with you, of course. What do you make of this, tilt towards China from Nepal?
Well, this statement which has come was unexpected. But the tilt towards China is an old one. It actually dates back to 2015 when constitution was being drafted and he faced problems from the Indian side, to the extent that we even supported his rival Sushil Koirala to contest against him in prime ministership. Later on, he also had to lose power because Prachanda decided to walk to the Nepali Congress and form the government. Therefore, he has, besides the national grudge that India put coercive diplomacy on us, he has a personal grudge that his being in power was challenged by India, and that is where his China tilt started. He was not known to be a pro-Chinese, he was not known to be a what you call a hardline communist as it is, but that is the beginning which was done. Now, after Foreign Minister Sushma's visit to Nepal, many people were expecting that once he assumes power, he would be far more balanced and softer. And that's why I say that this statement is somewhat unexpected. Though I believe that as the time unfolds, he probably would come to more of a balance in the relationship between two, which he indicated that I have to have good relations with both the countries. But this communist thesis of equidistance between China and India is something which is not compatible with Nepal's geopolitics and tradition.
Sure. Okay, let me bring in Ambassador Shiv Shankar Mukherjee into the picture. KP Sharma Oli has said that his statement is in keeping with the times. What does he mean by that?
Well, one thing, I underlined what Professor Muni said about the geopolitical situation in which Nepal has always found itself, even now, is not really compatible with equidistant relations between China and India. Sheer geography completely precludes that. As far as that statement is concerned, let us remember, and after 40 years in the job I can say so, that he was making a statement on Chinese soil. So at that moment in the country you're in, it is not only tempting, it is almost inevitable that you will stress the positives as far as that country is concerned.
Ambassador,
not otherwise.
that statement was not made on Chinese soil. It was made
about the Palestinian cause.
That statement was not made on Chinese soil. It was in fact an interview that was.
I saw the statement that he made in China. Maybe there was another.
The most recent one, it was an interview given to a Hong Kong newspaper, in fact, that we are talking about, and from there is where we are taking this topic on.
Well, Hong Kong is part of China, that's what I'm saying. It is, well, that's my point. It's an interview given to a Hong Kong newspaper, and Hong Kong is part of China.
Sure, go ahead, yeah.
Well, anyway, that apart, I don't think any Prime Minister in Nepal, including Prime Minister Oli with his somewhat recent anti-Chinese rhetoric and anti-Indian rhetoric and so on, will ignore the realities of the situation. This whole anti-Indian business has been thrashed out and exaggerated, and people have different opinions about it. The fact is that we are dealing with, and let me be very blunt, we are dealing with opportunistic politicians. I mean, ever since the first election in 2008, the politicians in Nepal have only been politicking. There has been virtually no governance. There's been musical chairs as far as forming various coalitions are concerned. And India is a good whipping boy to get instant popularity and target votes. We understand that. This China card, so to speak, has been there for decades, but finally honed by King Mahendra.
Okay.
And
I'm going to take the point that you're making about opportunistic politicians forward.
To a point.
That's a very valid point that you made. So, Professor Kondapalli, let me bring you into the picture. The ambassador has just spoken about opportunistic politicians, and, he said that the Chinese card has been played time and again. So, is this a shift in policy as far as Nepal is concerned, or is KP Sharma only just testing the waters?
I think between the statement and the reality and the dynamics in the next few years, I think we need to see that difference in how he will be able to practice the diplomatic efforts of that equidistance between New Delhi and Beijing. But I wanted to say the Chinese role here in terms of what are those determinants in Nepal. First is obviously the Tibet-related issue, because 19 counties are bordering Nepal, and that's a huge point that they have. For instance, the restrictions on the Tibetan refugees in the camps in Kathmandu is an immediate result of this, including seizing of the ballot boxes when the Tibetans were going for elections a few years ago, and the border trading posts that they have built, about 19 of them across the border, which so many of these were damaged during the earthquake a few years ago. That still is the motivation for China to kind of influence the Nepalese from an economic point of view, from the social, the crossings that Nepalese made into Tibet in terms of these, and this is reinforced by the bus diplomacy between Lhasa and Kathmandu. Then you have also the infrastructure projects that China is building, including what you just mentioned, the 2.5 billion Budh Gandak project in central Nepal. But also remember that there is no consensus within Nepal on this project. Baburam Bhattarai, for instance, last year opposed, and he said that there will be political protests against the project.
Sure.
So there is a huge concern on the infrastructure projects and their impact on the environmental issues in Nepal.
Indeed.
So to that extent, there are also limitations on Prime Minister Oli's policies. You have also the dynamic.
Talking about the limitations, let me bring in Professor Chaturvedi into the picture. What is it that KP Sharma Oli would like to achieve? What are his objectives and what are his challenges?
2 points, Frank. One, I don't agree. We should not brush this aside as opportunistic politician. I do not agree. I think each country has its own democratic approaches, and India, being a neighbor, should respect that. That's point number one. Point number two, if I take you back to 1956, when Girilal Jain came out with a small book saying how China and India are active in Nepal. And that book reminds us how Nepal has been into this venture. So I do not see anything new coming out. Probably India would have to keep on people-to-people engagement, and that, I think, is the pivot of our relationship with Nepal.
Sure.
It has been the live wire, the fact that we would have to be far more responsive. In 1961, 62, when initial requests came in, and 1965, finally, when Swan Singh as our foreign minister went in there, 1966, he was there. Consistent complaints of inefficiency and low quality Indian Development Corporation projects was there. When Mrs. Indira Gandhi went in there,
and we switched over from Indian aid mission to Indian cooperation mission, Mrs. Indira Gandhi was absolutely clear that we would respect your views. You appoint your economists to assess development cooperation projects, and 12 such reviews were conducted between 1967 and 71. So this kind of measure is now again required. We need to have that people-to-people contact. We have to respect their opinion, and that's where matter ends. To see that we have to go for one-man up ship kind of thing and that kind of approach, I think is not warranted and is not required at this stage.
You know, Professor Muni, Professor Chaturvedi has said that we need to, you know, keep in mind the historical ties, people-to-people contact is what we require going forward. What are the implications really for India as far as this statement is concerned, and KP Sharma Oli being the Prime Minister of Nepal?
Well, I take Sachin's point very valid, and there is no doubt that there has been a lot of deficit on India's part so far as its Nepal policy or even other policies are concerned. Let's not go into it. But let me broaden the perspective in which we are looking at Nepal. The Chinese approach is not only to Nepal. The Chinese approach is to entire South Asia and whole of Asia. We are not concerned with Asia, but here to the entire South Asia, all the India's neighbors which are involved there. And the major difference, and this is where I slightly disagree with Sachin, the major difference from what happened earlier in Sino-Nepalese relations and what happening is now, that China is assertive pushing itself into the region. Nepal being one of the critical areas, as Srikanth said very rightly, that Tibet and other concerns are there. And this is where the Chinese, for their own reasons, now tomorrow, even if Oli were to get away from this policy, theoretically, if he had to, the Chinese would push very hard, as they did it in Sri Lanka, as they did it in Myanmar, as they are doing it in Maldives, as they are doing in Pakistan. Have no doubts about it. There is absolutely no scope for India to look at the situation very complacently, that, you know, this we have seen earlier and it will happen. No, absolutely. This is my view.
Sure.
So in a broader perspective, you have to put in Nepal within the overall Chinese strategy. I think Srikanth can say more about it. And this is where India has to gear up its policy besides and in addition to what Sachin says, that we have to bridge our diplomatic deficit or delivery deficit so far as our neighbors are concerned. Now, this is where Oli is taking advantage of it. No leader in South Asia, Oli or no Oli, would really get away from the lure which the Chinese are dangling to them.
Okay.
Huge money coming up, huge projects are coming up. Who would not like to take them?
Okay. So, you know, taking off from what the professor just said, Ambassador, what should India's approach be to deal with China, not just in Nepal, but in the entire region?
Well, first of all, to just clarify on what I mentioned about opportunistic politicians, I state that as a fact. That does not mean that we don't deal with them or that we don't deal with them with respect that is due to their prime ministership or the leadership of a sovereign nation. In fact, more so, what we need to do is deal with whichever government is in power in Nepal at that moment of time. And I don't really think historical comparisons of the decades of the 50s or 60s are going to be of too much help, because quite apart from the China factor, which has changed, it has changed because till recently, China was content to advise Nepal to maintain good relations with India. They said so to successive prime ministers, they said so to the king. Now that has changed. China is visibly increasing very strongly its engagement in Nepal at the political level. That's number one. Number two, Nepal is no longer a monarchy. Number three, the Madhesh is today totally politicized and is a totally different ballgame in a secular democratic Nepal. All that has to be kept in mind. On the people-to-people relationship, yes, I fully agree, but that has to be maintained in a specific way, and that specific way is to make sure, I think more than one panelist referred to the slowness, the glacial pace at which our developmental activities progress. We have to simply become far better implementers of our development cooperation. there is need to address the challenge that China faces, but there is no need to panic about it. There is a need to engage with Nepal, and we can do so at level after level, not just at the political level, but at the business level, at the people level, and at the district level, and even beyond. That is the way the relationship is. We have to leverage it. We have to make use of it.
Sure.
It is not simply a question of focusing on one thing or the other. We have to do all of them, and we are capable of doing all of them. Unfortunately, the implementation leaves a whole lot to be desired, and we seem to react only to a certain crisis moments. That really is one of the problems that we face in Nepal.
You know, just to
We have
broaden
no
the scope of
difficulty
the
in
debate,
dealing
let me bring in
with
Professor
whichever
Kondapalli now. You know,
government comes into power.
Professor Kondapalli, as far as Nepal is concerned, what does it stand to gain from China, and what can China bring to the table that we can't?
Well, the China model that has been now exported to various countries, and as part of the 19th Party Congress, this has become a party policy and a state policy to export this to other countries. It's led by the export-oriented economy, but it also has a huge impact on environment. It's a huge impact on debt financing, debt diplomacy. There is also the issues related to democracy and so on. An authoritarian kind of model, which is now that Nepal is a bubbling democracy, the model has several structural problems in implementation in Nepal. To that extent, I think India has much more leverage in terms of adjusting with the Nepalese reality in this model of development. A model which is based on emphasizing on productive assets in the Nepalese society, which we are doing in Africa and other places. Secondly, in terms of the very low interest rates, unlike the Chinese, which have substantial interest rates, some 2 to 4% in some of the projects in Pakistan or in Nepal. This is one of the reasons why Pakistan had cancelled some of the hydroelectricity projects. The Pakistani Senate had been critical of that. So I think India needs to showcase, and as Ambassador Mukherjee mentioned, the implementation part is the one which needs to be kind of furthered. But on the other hand, if you look at the Prime Minister's visit to Kathmandu and the kind of interactions that we have had, various programs that we have been able to implement, especially also in hydroelectricity projects and other human resource development issues, I think there is the implementation part is one which needs to be fixed.
The focus needs to be on implementation of these projects is what you're suggesting, and that's what the other panelists have suggested as well. Moving forward now, Professor Kondapalli spoke about leverage. Professor Chaturvedi, I want to find out from you, the tilt towards China, how can Nepal use that to leverage against India, and are we going to fall for that trap?
That's what, Frank, I was saying. We should learn from history, and history tells us that this game is not new. Only thing that has changed now is that the circumference has widened, and it's not just Nepal, it's across our neighborhood. So we should not get into that game. We should play it on our own terms, and our terms are absolutely clear. We should get into culture, language, people-to-people contact, as I said earlier. But at the same time, improve the delivery, improve the effectiveness of our delivery. And that would come in, and again I would go to history, and Mrs. Gandhi's visit to Nepal is absolutely demonstrative in that context. When you bring in their experts, you bring in their participation in assessing your development cooperation projects. To what extent you can do that, you would have to be prepared. But we have done it earlier. And we should be the first one to undertake that process. Now, for last almost 17 years, India is implementing what is called as small development projects that were introduced in 2003 in Nepal. Day before yesterday, Nepal issued an official order saying that hitherto these projects would be dealt by local administration. This is an absolute victory for the approach that we came up with. Is strengthening local institutions and not making them vulnerable to absence of financing, by the state itself. So Nepal has agreed to extend their own federal support to local agencies and local development projects.
Sure. Okay.
This is absolutely fascinating. So I would re-emphasize the point that we need to improve the quality of delivery. We need to take them in our confidence in terms of implementation and assessment of development cooperation projects.
Okay, all right. I'm going to try and get quick closing comments from all my guests. Now, starting with you, Professor Muni. You know, Oli has also said that he favors a review of the practice of Nepalese soldiers serving in India's armed forces. Now, how will that affect India and you know, what's likely to happen there?
Well, I think it will affect Nepal more than India. Because if we don't recruit the Nepalese, the Indian armed forces are not going to be poorer in terms of their fighting skills. The problem would be that many Nepalese who get jobs here would not be getting. You have no idea of the remittances which the retired Gorkha soldiers get it. Babu Ram tried, the Maoists when they came to power, they tried to change it. This is an issue which is continuing since 1994-95, that they want to stop this because this is seen as a sign of subordination. The problem is that it has economic constraints, and let the Nepalese decide. If they do not want their people to fight elsewhere, good enough if they can provide jobs for them. Otherwise, these very people would really go up against it. But just one sentence, that on the whole, you know, in terms of taking those Indian embassy projects to the local administration is not a very happy sign so far as Indian diplomacy is concerned, because Indian diplomacy would lose its reach out to the various areas. And in the totality, Mr. Oli's statement is a caution that we are going to redefine the relationship.
Okay.
That is the matter of
You know,
concern.
it remains to be seen how the relationship is going to be redefined and what happens in the days to come. But, you know, Professor Kondapalli, Oli also said that, you know, China wants to update relations with India. I mean, what does that mean? Update relations in what way, really?
Well, during the earthquake a few years ago, the Indian contribution for the relief operations has been slightly higher than compared with China. And during those days, the Indian Foreign Ministry as well as the Chinese Foreign Ministry have had a kind of an arrangement in areas where India has a strength in relief operations, etc. Because we are the first one to have reached Kathmandu with relief materials within 1.5 hours or so, while the Chinese were taking time to regroup, etc., etc. So there was the arrangement, informal arrangement in terms of Nepal as far as the earthquake relief missions are concerned. This is a model that has come up, and this is one which suggests that India has some certain important stakes in Nepal in terms of social connections, family. There is the Madhesi factor. There is also the various constituencies,
sure.
business, and so on. That these are also the red lines for India that China should not cross.
Okay.
For instance,
let me get in the other two panelists as well, because I've got limited time on the program. You know, Ambassador Mukherjee, as far as the region itself is concerned, is it big enough for both India and China to coexist in?
Well, there's no choice about it. You can't wish India and China away. They are both part of the planet. They are where they are. So we have to face the Chinese challenge, not just in Nepal, but everywhere. That is how things are. And let me remind you, just 2-3 quick points. One, foreign policy is very dynamic. You have to deal with things as matters evolve. We gained a tremendous amount of goodwill because of our really, efforts post the earthquake in Nepal. I mean, our people, our army, our disaster relief people did a wonderful job. And yet, all that goodwill at the government level, at the political level, seemed to have frittered away because of the blockade that happened. Now, regardless of whether India did the blockade or not, the perception in Kathmandu, and I'm talking of Kathmandu politics, was that India did it or winked at it. And Prime Minister Oli and all those around him who have that same political agenda used it as
Ambassador, I'm
as they
sorry
could.
to cut you short. I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of the Big Picture. At that, of course, the consensus is that we need to increase people-to-people contact between India and Nepal, and also better implementation of projects in the days to come is something that is going to help the Indo-Nepal ties, is what our panelists are saying here. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.